was the kind of guy who attracted a lot of attention. Yet the police weren't interested in investigating the case.
He looked me right in my eyes and he goes, look, your father is another criminal out of the way.
There were no arrests, no speculation. Then the case just went back on the shelf as an unsolved, very, very bizarre murder.
Until a dogged undercover cop came along.
This had it all, drugs, the sex, the bad cops, it had everything.
It's after midnight on March 9th, 1989. Horace McKenna is returning home to his estate in the Brea Hills outside of Los Angeles, California, asleep in the back seat of his chauffeur-driven limousine. 20 bullets are fired into the rear window of his car as it sits at the gate of his estate. Horace McKenna never makes it home that night. McKenna's driver calls 911.
911 emergency?
Yes, my daughter's just been shot.
Horace McKenna's son, Mike, remembers how he found out.
It was a radio news story, detailed information, multiple gunshot wounds, backseat of a limousine, 6200 Carbon Canyon Road, Brea, California, prominent businessman, former Mr. America, bodybuilder. I mean, could you tell him that he also had a hair transplant? I got dressed, I got in my car, I went to 6200 Carbon Canyon Road.
It must have been 6 o'clock in the morning, it was already on the news, because I started getting phone calls from different people telling me that, yeah, turn on channel 11, you know, Mac, they got the camera crew down there, Mac got killed.
There was so much going on that morning that I found out, and I drove up there, and there was the police, and there was all the reporters. There was also a good 30 people standing around, residents of the area who heard about it.
At the crime scene, the driver tells police he has seen nothing and heard nothing. As police investigate, they discover the crime victim, Horace Big Mac Mckenna, is a strip club owner with lots of money and a shadowy past. Reporter David Barry has spent years following the case.
This is unrealistic movie stuff, and this is the murder victim in the story.
Sit. Good boy. Good boy.
Big Mac was an extraordinary character. You wouldn't believe him as a movie character because he was much larger than life.
Flex for us.
Flex?
Yeah, we want to see some real muscle.
The guy was 6'5", 6'6", weighed 290 pounds, bodybuilder. Owned a chain of strip clubs. Lived on an estate.
McKenna was a man of excesses. He owned 45 acres of prime canyon ranch land that he turned into a hilltop spread he called Tara.
His favorite movie was Gone with the Wind. He wanted a big palatial estate. And as he progressed in business, he bought an estate.
Larry Vail was Horace McKenna's neighbor, and the two became friends. Vail helped McKenna build Tara.
His dreams and things that he wanted were endless. He wanted a spot for a ghost town, which we built there, and he wanted his horses and his horse stalls and his tack rooms, and we made a nice arena down there where he could ride his horse, and we had trails all over the place.
Time of his death, there were 14 Spanish Arabian horses, 1 American saddlebred, and 1 Tennessee Walker. Come on. There we go. All right, don't bite hard. Sumatran tiger, Sheba. Black Panther, Sinbad. 2 king spider monkeys, Carlos and Charlie.
In fact, a couple of days after this video was shot, Larry Vail was heading up to the ranch when he came upon the crime scene.
I was going to work up there that day. I actually passed the place. I saw that, you know, the police were there and they had the tape up. I just drove past it. There was too many news people there.
But why would someone want McKenna dead? McKenna started out as a motorcycle cop in the CHP, the California Highway Patrol, in the late 1960s. His son Mike says he began investing in strip clubs while still in the CHP.
That was something he just didn't do. You know, highway patrol officer and strip club owner. No, those two did not go well. Oil and water, it don't mix.
McKenna left the California Highway Patrol after an accident on the job in the early 1970s. Owning strip clubs became a full-time job. There was a twist. McKenna was not the owner of these clubs. On paper, anyway.
He was a former highway patrolman who had gone bad. He had taken a prison rap on counterfeiting charges.
Because of Big Mac's conviction, he couldn't get a liquor license. So instead, McKenna got a so-called frontman to be listed as the owner on the paperwork, while he was the one who controlled the clubs.
When I gave interviews way back when, I made sure I left out all knowledge of the nightclubs way back when, for every reason in the book. It was one thing he always told me, that he goes, if you ever talk to anybody, I do not own these clubs.
Big Mac chose as his frontman in the clubs his former California Highway Patrol partner, Mike Woods. Mike Woods would own the clubs on paper and make 30% of the profits, while McKenna, the silent partner, would take home 70% of the club's earnings and run the clubs.
Well, it certainly was a relationship of convenience. Mac needed Woods with his clean name for the license, and Woods needed Mac, who had already gotten into the business and owned it.
And McKenna's clubs were making a fortune.
A lot of money. There was a lot of money to be made.
Candy, a former dancer, worked at several of Big Mac's clubs in the mid-'80s. Candy remembers Big Mac coming into the clubs. She asked that we conceal her identity.
He would come in fairly often, but when he would come in, everyone was kind of aware when he was there because he would come in and he would go to the back room.
The back room was where Big Mac watched the action on security monitors. He was making sure no one was pocketing the money that poured in, mostly as tips for the dancers.
The clubs are a really terrific source of revenue because the clubs that he runs are successful, and so it really sets up a situation that lends itself to the possibility of skimming.
That's exactly what McKenna and Woods were being investigated for, skimming or pocketing huge amounts of cash that flowed through the clubs. Since the clubs were a cash operation, Big Mac and Mike Woods could get away without reporting all the money they took in. By 1988, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office and the California State Tax Board were investigating Big Mac and Mike Woods, both former cops, for tax fraud. Big Mac claimed on his tax return that he made $40,000 a year. Meanwhile, he was living on an estate valued at nearly $1 million.
It was a big investigation. It covered all the clubs, and it mentioned his partner Mike Woods, and it mentioned other people, other employees, associates, and it was a 300-page document.
There were numerous police raids on McKenna's clubs, his luxury apartment, his ranch, and his gym where he worked out.
Everything would get raided at the same time, and they never found anything, but they would do a lot of damage, and I never knew what they were looking for. As far as, you know, drugs or money or something, they never found anything.
Even Ingrid and Annette, who took care of McKenna's horses, were aware of how closely he was being watched near the time of his death.
We would just be riding up, having a great time, the three of us, and up we would look, and there's a helicopter flying over, and he would flip them off, and you're never gonna get me. You're not gonna get my money. You're not gonna get me. And he would laugh and shirk it off, and we would laugh and just take it as a joke.
But it would prove to be serious.
There had been an indictment on tax fraud unsealed just, I think, 24 hours before the killing, so there was a lot of talk about that being a factor in it.
Despite McKenna's shady connections, the high-profile murder overwhelmed the small Brea Police Department. The case wasn't thoroughly investigated, perhaps due to a lack of resources.
They never contacted me, interviewed me.
I don't understand why the detectives didn't want to speak with us.
Even though I did keep a low profile, nobody still came around to ask me anything.
Was it possible that the Brea police didn't want to investigate the murder of an unsavory character, a cop gone bad? McKenna's son Mike remembers a conversation he had with the lead detective.
He looked me right in my eyes and he goes, look, your father is another criminal out of the way. You think we give a rat's ass about his murder? Case closed. They're not going to pursue it.
There were no arrests. There was no speculation. There was nothing. And then the case just went back on the shelf as an unsolved, very, very bizarre murder.
Next on the system, years later, a veteran investigator turns up the heat on this cold case. A owner and one-time California highway patrolman, Horace Big Mac McKenna, remained unsolved after 8 years. Investigator Rick Morton remembered the case. Because of the danger involved in Morton's undercover work, he requested that we conceal his identity.
When I was working for LAPD in the mid-70s to the early 80s, I was very much aware of Horace McKenna. I was working undercover in Vice, where Horace McKenna had his clubs and other massage parlor type locations.
By the time of the murder in 1989, he had lost touch with McKenna's world: organized crime, strip clubs, and vice crimes.
I opened the paper one morning, and there on the front page was Horace McKenna had been executed in the back of his limo at his ranch in Brea.
After 26 years with the LAPD, Rick Morton left in 1994 to join the Orange County District Attorney's Office as an undercover investigator.
When I came to the District Attorney's Office after I had been here about 2 years, I was assigned to the Organized Crime Unit, and we sat down and went over various individuals and various things that occurred in Orange County.
Morton began to dig into unsolved cases to familiarize himself with organized crime in Orange County.
When I got in the unit, I really needed to get caught up on what had been going on in the world of organized crime as well as in Orange County during the last 10 or 15 years. I was aware of those murders and did not think that they had been solved.
From the many unsolved murders Morton was investigating, he thought 3 were worthy of reopening, including the murder of Big Mac Mckenna 8 years earlier.
There were 4 or 5 murders that occurred, 3 of them involving strip clubs, all within about a 2.5, 3-year period. And there was some thoughts that possibly they were related. And we just started working it like you would any cold case homicide.
So in 1997, with the permission of his supervisor and the Brea Police Department, Morton reopened the McKenna case. It will consume much of his time and energy for the next 3 years.
I think he's particularly effective because of his persistence. And I also think it's greatly to his advantage that he is so unnoticeable looking. I mean, he does look like a high school teacher, a math teacher. And he's the person that you're not going to notice in a bar or a stakeout or a place. And he's the person you should notice because he's the one who's going to get you.
I just thought there was an opportunity to look at a lot of things that needed to be looked at, to really go into depth in some areas.
Morton and the cold case team try to persuade people who knew McKenna to talk. They search out his friends, his underworld connections, and the people who worked at the clubs.
It's portrayed a lot of times as a glamorous, sexy, fun way to live and all that. And, you know, we saw for the 3.5 years, we saw the real seedy side of that business and people's lives. When we went out and talked to people, we were interested in anything and everything we could find out about what was going on related to organized crime. One of the difficult things about a case that old is locating people. A lot of people have moved out of the area, have changed their names, are dead. But on the other side, some people also are more willing and apt to talk 12 years later, 10 years later, than they would.
There is much to be done.
Follow-ups that hadn't been done, people that needed to be talked to or re-interviewed. There were just a lot of things I felt would be valuable in pursuing the case, and was really putting a list together of people that we wanted to talk to, and it was a very large list, just the more we interviewed and the more information we got, the more focused we became.
One of his first stops, the victim's son.
I'm at the gym, I've got 45 pounds in this hand, 45 pounds in this hand. 2 guys walk around the corner. Michael McKenna, throw out the badges. And then they proceeded to tell me who they were and, you know, why they're there. They told me they had reopened the case. They didn't tell me why. They didn't tell me what evidence they had. I mean, they don't have to, and that's fine by me.
Morton goes back and re-interviews the original witnesses in the case, looking for a break.
He did a lot of homework. In fact, he investigated a lot of people before he'd seen me.
I definitely took it home with me. I don't see how you can work a case like this the way we worked it and not take it home with you. You just can't put everything down at 5 o'clock on a Friday and go home and forget about it until Monday. That didn't happen. I mean, we were getting calls at nighttime, off hours, on the weekends.
Every now and then they'd come around, you know who this person is? Show me a picture. And if I said yes or no, and depending on the next question to follow, if I said no, yeah, okay, see you later.
For Morton, all roads are leading to the rivalries and murky business dealings in McKenna's strip clubs.
One of the obvious things you look at is the business dealings and business partners and problems in that regards. And it just seemed to keep coming back to the same motive and the same group.
The motive, greed. The group, McKenna's partner, Mike Woods, and a burly bodyguard Woods had hired named David Amos. Before Big Mac's death, his partnership with Woods had begun to sour.
It was a wrong partnership between both of them. They didn't see eye to eye on absolutely nothing. I think Mike wanted a clean club, and he wanted everything done by the law, and Mac wanted to cipher everything from the bottom.
Things were generally tense when Woods and Mac were at the club together at the same time. Things were very, very tense. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife.
They're like Tugboat Annie and the Queen Mary. You know, one's a real small little guy, and the other guy's a huge, muscular guy. Personality-wise, completely different. Completely different.
Well, you're either one of Mike's girls or you're one of Mac's girls, but you weren't both.
Apparently, Woods was so afraid of Big Mac that he felt he needed Amos's protection.
I believe he came here early 1980s, and he started working one of the clubs.
Amos was, Mike Woods had hired him as his bodyguard. And his interest was only for Mike.
Rick Morton begins to suspect that Mike Woods was involved in McKenna's death.
There's only one person that I knew of that really had anything to gain, and that was Woods.
I always suspected Mike Woods of having something to do with it, just because he was so greedy. I mean, he's the guy that has everything to gain, right?
And the fact that Woods and McKenna are former highway patrolmen only fuels Morton's determination.
What really bothered me was the damage that had been done, to law enforcement.
Rick Morton said one of the things was that it offended him as a cop to hear from people that he was asking questions that this case would never be solved because it involved law enforcement. And by definition, law enforcement doesn't investigate it itself.
Next on the system, cops close in on McKenna's killer. Rick Morton of Orange County's Organized Crime Unit pursues the reopened case of Big Mac Mckenna's murder. He is becoming more convinced that McKenna's business partner, ex-cop Mike Woods, was somehow involved in the murder, along with Woods' bodyguard David Amos. But he has nothing linking them to the crime, yet. Then he begins hearing another name.
There were a couple of witnesses that had mentioned John Sheridan.
Johnny Sheridan was known to the police as a strictly small-time crook and drug dealer. But that's not how his ex-wife thought of him.
John Patrick Sheridan is the most cunning sociopath you'll ever meet. He is charming. He is boy-like. If you catch him on a bad day, his look can kill you. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, he wanted to be a cop, he wanted to be an actor, but with his criminal mind and being a professional con man, all he could do was be a criminal.
Sheridan was a neighbor of Dave Amos, who was Woods' bodyguard and right-hand man. It was through David Amos that Sheridan got a job at one of Mike's clubs. Sheridan was rumored to be involved in what was supposed to be a contract killing. Morton takes note.
The contract that brought us to John Sheridan that, we were told was a contract murder, ends up it was a contract to break some bones, which never did occur, but again, those kind of things happened.
John Sheridan's name also comes up through another source. He was a confidential informant for an undercover Ventura County detective, Sergeant Kurt Rothschiller. Rothschiller, whose identity also needs to be protected, remembers his first conversation with Sheridan about Big Mac.
Sheridan indicated he wanted to talk to me about Big Mac. And I had no idea what he was talking about, and he went on to say it was a guy that had been murdered. So I ran the names that I knew through a system, and I believe that's how Morton got in touch with me.
Morton called Rothschiller after he found out that Rothschiller had arrested Sheridan in 1987. Morton is apprehensive about sharing any information on the McKenna murder.
Rick gave me very limited information to begin with. So at the time, it was left with simply, if he wanted me to try to get together with Sheridan, I would. He explained that they thought Sheridan knew something about the Big Mac case.
First, Rothschiller convinces Sheridan to meet with him alone.
I met him at a sports bar in the Valley. I told him that investigators from Orange County had contacted me, reference him in the Orange County case, and he had put me in a difficult position. And I needed to know why he brought it up in the first place and what he knew. His initial reaction was, I almost didn't come because I knew that this is what it was going to be about.
The nervous Sheridan clearly knows more than he's telling, but Rothschiller makes some progress.
He didn't come right out and say much. Ultimately, what he did agree to was to meet with myself and Orange County at a later date.
So a meeting is set up with Sheridan and the two investigators, Rothschiller and Morton.
It was at the same location, I think a week later. And initially I went in and met with Johnny by myself, and then maybe a half hour later Rick came in, and Morton obviously knew the case inside and out, and the best way to handle it is to have the lead investigator elicit the information himself. And so my goal really was to get Johnny to agree to sit down and talk to somebody else besides me.
The two cops start their gentle persuasion, offering to trade leniency for information.
And it was obvious to me that he knew something when he started talking about what kind of deal he could make. And I think we both indicated that if he was the guy that bought the bullets, well, not that much trouble, but if you're the shooter, you're in a whole lot of trouble.
But the two veteran investigators are stunned by what happened next. Sheridan openly admits to the murder of Big Mac Mckenna 11 years earlier.
One rounds went off. When they were done, what I heard was the guy said, I've been shot.
Rothschiller never figured Sheridan for a killer.
It was really a shock when he admitted to be the shooter, because he's quick-witted and he's humorous and caring. I think everyone thought he had some part, but not that much.
We had a pretty strong feeling that he had significant information and possibly was involved in the case, so it didn't surprise us that he had the information. What was surprising was that how soon he came forward with the information and ultimately confessed to being the shooter.
But to his ex-wife Millicent, this came as no surprise.
After John Patrick murdered Horace McKenna, he came home that night, woke me up in the middle of the night, telling me he had just killed Mac. This is the word he used. And I said, what? And he was like, I just killed Mac. And then he used some curse words to describe him as being, oh, he's a dirty cop anyway, and he effing deserved to die.
Millicent was afraid to talk to police about what she knew about McKenna's murder. But that changed when Rick Morton took over the investigation.
When I first met Rick Morton, the minute he walked in my front door, I knew he was one of the good guys. I put my life in his hands, and God bless him for his tenacity, you know.
Rick Morton's investigation is falling into place. Sheridan confirms his suspicions. McKenna's murder was for hire, and the man who did the hiring was Dave Amos, bodyguard to McKenna's partner and rival.
They asked me with his accent, Johnny, you know anybody to take care of somebody? I said, what? Kill him? He goes, yeah. I said, I thought it was like joking somehow, I go, are you serious? He goes, yeah. I said, I don't know. I said, that's not my thing, He goes, the pay is good, I said, well, what's the pay? He goes, he told me $20,000. And I thought, well, the guy's a bad guy, he's not an angel, he's he hurts people himself, everybody and their mother's after this guy.
At first, Sheridan says he tried to find a hitman to carry out McKenna's murder.
I remember, like I said, people tell me they do it, so I thought, I could get somebody to do it, you know what I mean, and take care of David's problem, and I go, but I still didn't want to do it.
But when he couldn't find anyone to carry out the murder, he says he took on the job himself.
Nobody wanted anything to do with it when they found out who it was. And meanwhile, I'm spending his money. And hell, I can't tell him I ain't gonna do it, even if I give him the money back. I mean, I go, this guy's gonna go, I'm thinking this guy's gonna go down anyway, somehow. And I go, I've seen movies, you know, they're not gonna let me run around knowing this stuff. So I met him in the office, and I said, I'll take care of that for you, but it's gonna be 25. So I thought, well, you know, I'm gonna do all this stuff. You know what I mean? I'm a friend, but I'm only a friend so much. I mean, I might as well make a couple $1,000, right? Pays the bill, right?
Sheridan went to McKenna's Tara Ranch several times. Finally, in the early hours of March 9th, 1989, Sheridan decided to go through with the murder. He lay in wait at the entrance to the ranch. When Big Mac's limo stopped at the gate, Sheridan pulled the trigger of his Uzi machine gun, killing McKenna in a hail of bullets.
I dumped the clip, the whole clip, into the car, and then I heard Mac say, you know, I've been shot, which shocked me, because I figured with that, you know, with that many rounds, he'd be, you know, I thought it would be pretty instant, you know, like on TV type of a thing, and apparently wasn't.
Next, investigators move one step closer to the mastermind behind the murder of Big Mac McKenna.
The story was phenomenal. Stuff you just can't make up.
Rick Morton now knows that Johnny Sheridan was the hired hitman who murdered Horace McKenna in his limo in 1989. He even knows who hired him, Dave Amos. And Dave Amos, the British bodyguard, had certainly prospered in the years since McKenna's death.
David Amos was living very large. He had a nice apartment off the Sunset Strip. He drove a Mercedes 600, which is a $140,000 top-of-the-line Mercedes. He also had a live-aboard boat at the marina, whimsically titled Wankers Away, for a guy who worked in strip clubs.
Johnny Sheridan hadn't fared so well. He was still a small-time crook with no money.
I got Mike driving around in a brand new Mercedes. He buys a car every 6 months, or he used to buy a car every 6 months, you know, and boats and all this stuff. And David's got Humvees and all that stuff.
In 1989, Sheridan went to prison for 2.5 years on an unrelated drug charge. During that time, Dave Amos had become wealthy working at the strip clubs. Meanwhile, Sheridan's ex-wife says that Amos gave her money for her then-husband's part in the murder.
I was instructed that David was going to be doing murder money payments through me while John was incarcerated. It wasn't until the day of the sentencing that David Amos approached me in a conversation outside the courtroom, stating in his sickening, charming English accent, you know, Millicent, as you know, Mike and I owe Johnny some money, and it would be great if you could stop by the club or stop by my house, and so on and so forth, to pick up the money.
He did not get well taken care of for carrying out the murder that he said he committed. David Amos, on the other hand, whom he says set it up, did. David Amos became quite wealthy and lived very comfortably, and Sheridan was sort of scrabbling at the edges 11 years later, and I think he was angry.
With nothing to lose, confessed killer Sheridan decides to be the bait in a trap to catch David Amos and perhaps his boss, Mike Woods, in the plot to murder McKenna.
We used him for about 8 months out there working with us to help put this case together.
Johnny Sheridan agrees to work with the detectives, and in a highly unusual move, is released to go back to work at the strip clubs. Releasing Sheridan is the only way Morton knows how to get hard evidence on Amos and Woods. Sheridan agrees to wear a wire.
Very, very tense, dangerous, stressful. It was a huge chance that we took. There were a lot of concerns, and it wasn't taken lightly.
The most beneficial thing that could be done to get a conviction or to get indictments against his co-conspirators was to let him stay out of jail and let him stay out of custody and continue to operate in the criminal underground.
You're worried about it, waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about it, hoping nothing's gone wrong. There were times that there was serious discussions about ending it, but as long as we kept moving towards the goal. We seem to be making progress.
The plan is for Sheridan to ask Dave Amos for the rest of his payment for carrying out the murder of Horace McKenna. And Morton and his team will be listening and recording the conversation. They hope Amos will incriminate himself and implicate Mike Woods in the murder.
We thought we had a good shot at it based on an evaluation of the case at that time, Sheridan's relationship with David Amos, his position in the clubs.
It all depends on Johnny Sheridan, a confessed murderer, conman, and snitch.
I had to get him to talk, and we didn't talk. We didn't talk that much at all. That's why it took 10 months to get him. So I had to come in there panicking, like, oh, I'm being followed. You know what I mean? And they're all, Johnny, settle down. No, settle down. I'm going up for murder one. I'm being followed. They're on to me, and that created the conversation.
I think probably in that case, Sheridan's con ability really was a big benefit. They're really trying to get the evidence on these guys, and if Sheridan gets discovered, he's really their main card, and that would be lost.
For months, Sheridan goes to work wearing a wire, always worried that he will be discovered, or that the wire he is wearing will run out of battery power.
It's touchy-feely. I mean, sometimes I'm wearing 2 wires, so I was very conscious. I mean, and one of them I had to change the battery, like no more than an hour and a half. So I'm usually popping them out sometimes 10 minutes later because, you don't always get the chance that, I can't change it in front of you. And I'm carrying tons of batteries. So, I mean, you could have followed anywhere I went from L.A. by just finding, little AAA batteries,
Meanwhile, Morton and his team are nearby in case something goes wrong.
You're in cars for hours. When somebody's working in the club and they're there, you're there.
Amos is suspicious. He insists on meeting Sheridan at locations where he thinks there is less chance he can be overheard. After months of surveillance, Amos gives Sheridan the rest of the money. Investigators now have what they need to bring in Amos for questioning. Amos tries to play it cool at first, but then Sheridan is brought in to tell him the game is up.
I told him everything, David. Why 10 months? When are you going to get out? I don't know. So you don't have a deal? That's the best deal you're going to get. Which is no deal. Well, here's what I had, David. I had lethal injection or life without. That's what I was looking at. I'll get out, David. And you'll get out, too. Well, I'm telling you. I don't know, but I'm going to get out. I'll tell you right now, if you don't, you'll never get out. I know it's kind of hard for you to trust me, but it's the truth. They want Mike. I couldn't get him. You can get him.
Amos quickly agrees to wear a wire to catch the man investigators believe is behind the contract killing, Mike Woods. Astonishingly, in 1997, Mike Woods had produced a low-budget movie about gangsters in L.A. called Flipping, starring none other than his bodyguard, Dave Amos.
Mike, you made a deal with a cop?
Incredibly, Amos's character ends up flipping and becoming an agent for the police. Dave Amos, in fact, was a card-carrying member of the Screen Actors Guild, and his boss had visions of fame and fortune, too.
He wanted to make movies, and that's the California dream. Everybody wants to be a movie producer. And Woods did. He made a movie that looks as if it's the story of his crime.
In 1995, Woods had produced The Takeover, starring Dave Amos as the hero, fighting to regain control of his strip clubs from a crime lord rival.
We're dealing with people with enough money and power to do anything they want.
I had people that knew nothing about the case. They saw the movie and they go, that reminds me of that Mac guy. I was like, oh man, I can't believe they're doing this. It's just arrogance.
During the course of Rick Morton's investigation, he hears about the movie too.
In the middle of the investigation, interviewing a witness, and the witness said, oh, have you seen the movie? They made a movie. And, it was told to us like it followed the whole scenario.
While this murder for hire starts to sound like a Hollywood movie, it's a deadly game. McKenna was dead. Sheridan is going to prison. And Dave Amos is bargaining for his life. Next on the system, catching the big fish.
Every Wednesday on Court TV, it's all...
The 3-year investigation of Rick Morton and his team have yielded the hitman and the middleman responsible for the murder of former cop and club owner Big Mac Mckenna. Now they want the man they are sure is the mastermind, Mike Woods. The doggedness of lead investigator Morton is finally paying off.
If you look at all the names that we had come up with in the investigation, it was over 1,000 names. I mean, that's a lot of them.
With Sheridan's confession and cooperation, Morton has caught Dave Amos. Amos also confesses and agrees to cooperate. And with that, another piece of the puzzle falls into place.
When all the evidence comes out that we have, I think everybody will agree that, yeah, Mike Woods was behind this thing. Mike Woods orchestrated it.
But Morton needs that evidence to prove that Woods ordered the death of Mckenna. He gets Dave Amos to wear a wire to catch Mike Woods. Dave Amos and Mike Woods meet at Jerry's Deli, a San Fernando Valley restaurant, on October 27, 2000. Morton and his team are outside taping the whole conversation. Although difficult to hear, investigators get what they want.
I'm going to go back to the same old story like we've always said. Who else was I going to get to do it?
Finally, investigators have the link between Mike Woods and Dave Amos. The tape confirms what investigators suspected all along, that Mike Woods was the man behind McKenna's murder. He had set the whole plot in motion. They arrest Amos and Woods as soon as they leave the restaurant. In August 2001, 12 years after the crime, Mike Woods goes on trial for the murder of Big Mac Mckenna, his former business partner.
Mr. McKenna is very flamboyant. He lives life large. They just want to run their business and make money. It's all about making money, and they don't need trouble. McKenna's causing problems.
Prosecutor Bruce Moore describes how the sting played out in his opening statements to the jury.
So you send Amos in to the Jerry's Deli. He's got his recording devices on him. He's essentially a mule for our recording devices. And then the conversation begins.
He plays the incriminating audio tape in court. Although barely audible in the noisy restaurant, Amos is heard discussing the murder plot and the cover-up with Mike Woods.
We're on the inside listening to two murderers talk about how to get away with it.
In court, Woods' lawyers claim the two men were discussing a pending tax fraud case and not McKenna's murder.
And it's clear he's not talking about getting Dave Amos to do the murder. He's talking about getting Dave Amos to run the business. But you're shown a portion of the conversation and asked to conclude from that that this has something to do with hiring David Amos to do the murder. It's not there.
Besides, defense attorneys argue that Woods is not the type to order a contract killing.
And what I want to talk to you about is who Mike Woods is. He's been married to the same woman for 36 years. He has 2 daughters. They have a nice family. They have a nice life, just like you and I.
Defense attorneys argue that just because Mike Woods owns strip clubs, that doesn't make him a murderer.
That's what this case is all about. An attempt to sort of paint Mike Woods as a strip club owner, to sort of put the imprimatur, to put some kind of cloak of sleaze over him, so that you'll think because of the business he's in, because of what he does, he must be guilty of murder.
They argue that it was bodyguard Dave Amos who stood to gain most from McKenna's murder.
Horace McKenna's death is the result of greed. There's no doubt about that. But it's not Mike Woods' greed. It's Dave Amos's.
The prosecution fires back that Woods had plenty of motives.
The heat was on, and McKenna was bringing the heat. And if you get rid of McKenna, you get rid of the problem. And that's exactly what happened.
And they charge Woods had the biggest motive of all, greed.
You have the ability of Mr. Woods to take the whole clubs, all of it, because McKenna's a silent owner. You wipe him out, you whack him, you got the whole thing. Do whatever you want with it.
But would the jury find Mike Woods guilty? Next, the verdict. Big Mac Mckenna. The investigation involved 3 years of painstaking phone calls, follow-up interviews, and an 8-month undercover sting operation. An operation that let a confessed killer out on the street to act as bait. The gamble paid off. Mike Woods is facing life without parole.
My emotional reaction, I honestly can tell you I was scared, but the verdict went my way, and it was, how can you describe it? If someone was sitting on my shoulders, they got off.
But Mike McKenna isn't satisfied with putting Mike Woods behind bars for the rest of his life. He's planning to sue Mike Woods' family for his share of the club's profits since his father's death.
Well, Michael Woods himself said it on the stand. He was the front man, my father was the real owner, and yeah, he owes me money. But he never paid it. But he admitted that he owed it to me. Well, why didn't you pay it?
Even if Mike wins, he doesn't think he will ever fully come to terms with his father's murder.
Ain't no such thing as closure. People have been asking me that for years, ever since the murder. You know, closure this and closure that. You can take all your closure sayings and shove them up here because there's no such thing. Closure would be having my father back. That's closure, and that's not going to happen. You know, maybe in the world of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, things like that happen, but not in the real world.
To Larry Vail, Big Mac was just like his name, larger than life.
I could just imagine bullets bouncing off his chest and grabbing you, you know, but I'm not saying that Mac didn't have enemies, you know, that had people that didn't like him.
But for Candy, the case is over.
I was relieved that they finally got the person that had done it. I was very relieved because Mac did not deserve to die that way. He really didn't.
For their roles in the murder, Amos and Sheridan each received 20-year sentences, although they could get out in as little as 10. Originally, Sheridan hoped for a 15-year sentence, so he would get out in 7.5. However, the judge objected to the prosecution, allowing Sheridan to plead guilty to manslaughter rather than murder. Whatever the sentence, for Sheridan, it won't be easy time.
I'm like what they call, well, I'm a rat, and I'm a high-profile one. So I think they're going to put me somewhere. They got to put me somewhere out of main line because someone's going to end up getting stabbed if I'm in, you know, in the main general population. Right. Now.
John Sheridan is worried that Mike Woods, the man he helped convict, will try to kill him in prison.
He's going to make moves on me, I'm sure. He's got nothing to lose. Life without parole. 59 years old.
The judge showed leniency and sentenced Mike Woods to 25 years to life with the possibility of parole. And Rick Morton is still working undercover with the Orange County District Attorney's Organized Crime Unit.
The idea of these men, Woods and Amos, living so well for so long and thinking they'd gotten away with this. And if it hadn't been for Rick Morton, they probably would have.
What better kind of a case to work if you're going to work organized crime than a murder that has all of those things? I mean, this had it all. You know, it had the drugs, the sex, the, you know, entertainment industry, bad cops. You know, just it had everything.